I'm about to tell you 9 things I found during my 23 years with Colorado Search and Rescue that I was explicitly ordered never to discuss. Not with my family, not with journalists, not even with other SAR teams outside my immediate unit. The gag order came from somewhere way above our station chief, stamped with federal classifications I'd never seen before. But I'm retiring in 6 weeks. My pension is secure, and some truths are too important to die with the people who know them. My name is Robert Chen. I've pulled bodies from avalanches, talked down suicidal climbers, and carried injured hikers through blizzards that would freeze exposed skin in under 3 minutes. I've seen what nature does to the unprepared and what desperation does to the human body. But nothing in 2 decades of mountain rescue prepared me for what we started finding in the summer of 1997. The first incident happened on July 9th, 1997, in the Flat Tops Wilderness area. We got the call at 4:37 in the morning. A group of backpackers had activated their emergency beacon after one of their party, a 24-year-old geology student named Marcus Brennan, had gone missing during the night. They'd been camping near Trappers Lake when Marcus left the tent around 2 a.m. to relieve himself. He never came back. The group had searched for him until dawn, calling his name, sweeping the area with flashlights, but found nothing. That's when they hit the beacon. Our team assembled by 6 a.m., 8 of us total, including me, our station chief, Dale Morrison, a tracking specialist named Sarah Kovach, and 5 other experienced rescue personnel. We took 2 vehicles into the wilderness area, parking at the trailhead around 8:15. The backpackers met us there, 3 college kids who looked like they hadn't slept. 2 guys and a woman, all in their early 20s, all visibly shaken. The woman, Jessica, did most of the talking. Her hands trembled as she showed us on the map exactly where they'd been camped. She kept saying the same thing over and over. He just went to pee. He was only going like 20 feet away. We would have heard if something happened. We would have heard him scream. Sarah asked the obvious question. Did you hear anything, any sounds during the night before he disappeared? Jessica looked at the 2 guys. They exchanged glances. Finally, one of them, a kid with a University of Denver hoodie, spoke up. There was something. Around 1:30, maybe an hour before Marcus got up. We all heard it. It sounded like... He paused, searching for words, like someone hitting a tree with a baseball bat. Over and over, maybe 10 or 12 times. Deep in the forest, probably a couple hundred yards from camp. We figured it was just a branch falling or something. What direction? Sarah pressed. North. Definitely north. The sound came from up the valley. Sarah and Dale exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. Dale made a note in his field book. Did Marcus say anything before he left the tent? Did he seem agitated or scared? No, Jessica said. He just mumbled something about needing to pee and unzipped the tent. That was it. We hiked to their campsite, reaching it around 10 a.m. It was a standard backcountry setup. 2 tents, a hanging bear bag, a cold fire pit. Sarah immediately began working the scene, looking for tracks, signs of disturbance, anything that might tell us where Marcus had gone. She found his tracks almost immediately, boot prints in the soft earth leading away from the tent toward a cluster of pine trees about 30 feet distant. The tracks were normal, regular stride, no signs of running or stumbling. But then right at the edge of the tree line, they stopped. Just stopped. Sarah knelt down, examining the ground carefully. The rest of us spread out, searching the surrounding area in expanding circles. I was maybe 50 yards from camp, checking behind a fallen log, when Sarah called out, "Everyone get over here now." Her voice had an edge to it that made us all move fast. We gathered around her at the spot where Marcus's tracks ended. She was pointing at the ground, at something I hadn't noticed at first. There were other prints, big prints, much bigger than Marcus's size 10 hiking boots. These prints were at least 18 inches long, maybe 7 inches wide. They showed 5 distinct toes. No claw marks, but the impressions were deep, suggesting something incredibly heavy. And they were everywhere around the spot where Marcus's tracks stopped. Dale pulled out his camera, photographing the prints from multiple angles. His face was carefully neutral, but I could see tension in his jaw. "How many different prints are we looking at?" he asked Sarah. She studied the ground. "At least 2 individuals. This set here is slightly larger than those over there. See the difference in toe spread? Whatever these things are, there were at least 2 of them, and they were here when Marcus was." The tracks told a story, one that made my skin crawl. Marcus had walked to the trees, presumably to relieve himself. The large prints approached from the north, the same direction the wood-knocking sounds had come from earlier. There were signs of disturbance in the soil, scuff marks that suggested rapid movement, and then Marcus's tracks disappeared entirely. The large prints led away from the scene, heading north up the valley, deeper into the wilderness. Sarah looked up at Dale. "We need to follow this trail." Dale hesitated. I could see him calculating, weighing options. Finally, he nodded. "Sarah, you take point on the tracking. Rob, you're with her. I'll coordinate from here with the rest of the team. Keep your radios on and check in every 15 minutes. If you find anything, and I mean anything unusual, you call it in immediately before approaching." Sarah and I set off following the massive prints. They were surprisingly easy to track. The creatures weren't trying to hide their passage. The stride length was enormous, easily 6 feet between steps. Whatever made these tracks was either very tall or taking deliberate, exaggerated steps. We followed the trail for about 40 minutes, climbing gradually up the valley. The forest grew denser, older pines and firs that had been standing for centuries. The undergrowth was thick, mountain laurel and ferns creating a green maze between the trees. The prints stayed consistent, 2 individuals moving parallel to each other about 10 feet apart. Then Sarah stopped, abruptly holding up her hand. I froze. Ahead of us, maybe 30 yards away, something was hanging from a tree. We approached cautiously. Sarah's hand was on the bear spray attached to her belt. Mine was too. As we got closer, I felt my stomach drop. It was Marcus's backpack, or what was left of it. The pack had been completely torn apart, fabric shredded, the frame bent and twisted like someone had tried to fold it in half. Contents were scattered across the ground beneath the tree. A water bottle, crushed flat. A camp stove. The fuel canister punctured. A sleeping bag, ripped down the middle. Clothing torn into strips. And blood. Not a lot, but enough. Dark red stains on some of the fabric, on the tree bark, on the ground. Sarah keyed her radio. "Dale, we found his pack. It's been destroyed. There's blood, but not a massive amount." Continuing to track. Dale's voice crackled back. "Copy that. Be advised, we're calling in additional support. Sheriff's Department is sending a deputy, and we've contacted Fish and Wildlife. Whatever you're tracking, we need official documentation." We moved past the destroyed pack, following the trail deeper into the forest. The blood spots continued, occasional drops on rocks and vegetation. But the pattern was wrong for a typical attack. It wasn't the blood trail of someone injured and fleeing. It was more like transfer blood, small amounts being carried along rather than flowing from a wound. The terrain grew rougher. We were climbing now, following a game trail that wound between massive boulders. My calves burned. Sweat dripped into my eyes despite the cool mountain air. Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, her eyes constantly scanning the ground, reading the story written in disturbed soil and bent grass. Then the trail led us to a small clearing, and Sarah stopped so suddenly I almost ran into her. "Oh my God," she whispered. The clearing was roughly circular, maybe 40 feet across. The ground was bare dirt, packed hard. and arranged around the perimeter were objects. Human objects, a hiking boot, a blue jacket, what looked like a baseball cap, a water bottle, this one intact, a camping knife, all arranged in a deliberate circle, evenly spaced. And in the center of the clearing, driven into the ground like a fence post, was a stripped branch about 5 feet tall. Tied to the top of it with what looked like shoelaces was Marcus's wallet. Sarah keyed her radio, her voice shaky. "Dale, you need to get up here. I don't even know how to describe what we're seeing. Just get up here. We're sending coordinates now." We stayed at the edge of the clearing, not approaching. This wasn't a random scattering of belongings. This was deliberate. This was arranged. This was something. Dale's response came after a pause. "Stay put. Do not approach whatever you've found. We're coming to you with full team and law enforcement. ETA 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. Sarah and I sat on a fallen log at the clearing's edge, neither of us speaking much. We both knew we were looking at something that shouldn't be possible. Animals don't arrange objects in circles. Animals don't tie wallets to branches. Finally, we heard voices. Dale appeared first, breathing hard from the climb. Behind him came 3 other team members, a deputy from Rio Blanco County Sheriff's Department, and a man in Colorado Parks and Wildlife uniform. They all stopped when they saw the clearing. "What the hell is this?" the deputy asked, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. "That's what we'd like to know," Dale replied. The Parks and Wildlife officer, whose name tag read Martinez, walked slowly around the perimeter, examining the arranged objects without touching them. His expression was carefully controlled. "You said you were following tracks." "Large tracks?" Sarah nodded. 18 inches long, minimum, 2 individuals. They led us straight here. Martinez exchanged a glance with Dale. That lasted a beat too long. "You've seen this before," I said. It wasn't a question. Martinez was quiet for a moment, then he turned to the deputy. "I need you to clear the scene and call your supervisor. Tell him we have a federal wildlife situation and they need to contact the regional office immediately." The deputy looked confused but keyed his radio and walked a short distance away. Martinez turned to our group. "What I'm about to tell you is classified under federal wildlife protection statutes. I need verbal confirmation from each of you that you understand you cannot discuss this with anyone outside official channels." We all agreed, though I don't think any of us really understood what we were agreeing to. Martinez took a breath. "These are Sasquatch territorial markers. We've documented 17 similar sites across Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana over the past 12 years. They appear to serve as warnings or boundary indicators. The objects arranged are typically taken from humans who've entered what the creatures consider their territory." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Dale found his voice. "Sasquatch. You're telling me Bigfoot is real?" Martinez's expression didn't change. "I'm telling you there is an undocumented species of great ape living in remote wilderness areas of North America. They're extremely intelligent, normally very reclusive, and typically avoid human contact at all costs. But when humans enter what they've marked as their territory, especially repeatedly, they sometimes engage in what we call assertive messaging. They take objects and arrange them to communicate. The message is usually clear. Leave. This is our space." Sarah pointed at the wallet on the branch. "And Marcus Brennan? Where is he?" "That's what we need to determine," Martinez said grimly. "In the 17 previous cases we've documented, the human involved was always found. Sometimes they'd been escorted to the edge of the territory and released, scared but unharmed. Twice they were found disoriented but alive, with no memory of several hours. In 3 cases, he paused. In 3 cases, the individuals were found deceased, but from environmental exposure, not from violence. Falls, hypothermia, 1 heart attack. The theory is that the encounter was so stressful it led to panic and accident. What about the other cases? I asked. Martinez looked uncomfortable. In 3 cases, we never found them. They just vanished. Over the next 6 hours, we conducted the most surreal search operation of my career. Martinez called in additional parks and wildlife personnel. 2 more teams arrived, both seeming unsurprised by what we'd found. They brought specialized equipment, cameras with motion sensors, audio recording devices, even thermal imaging equipment. They documented everything. Every object in the clearing was photographed, GPS tagged, and carefully collected. They took plaster casts of the massive footprints. They collected hair samples from torn fabric. They set up a grid search pattern and swept the surrounding forest. Marcus's friends were quietly relocated to a hotel in Meeker and told they would be contacted when we had more information. They were also required to sign non-disclosure agreements that I'm pretty sure weren't legally enforceable, but effectively silenced them anyway. At 6:47 p.m., one of the search teams called in. They'd found something. We all converged on their location about a quarter-mile north of the clearing. The team had found Marcus. He was alive. He was sitting at the base of an enormous spruce tree, his arms wrapped around his knees, rocking slightly. His eyes were open but unfocused. He was barefoot, his feet bloody and torn from walking through rough terrain. His clothing was intact but dirty. There was a cut on his forehead, dried blood crusting his eyebrow. But he was breathing. He was alive. The medical team moved in immediately. Marcus didn't respond to questions. He just kept rocking, staring at nothing. When they tried to examine him, he flinched but didn't resist. They checked his vitals, pulse elevated but steady, pupils responsive, no obvious major injuries beyond the cut and the torn feet. They wrapped him in a thermal blanket and started an IV. "We need to get him to a hospital," the lead medic said. "He's in shock." As they prepared to move him, Marcus suddenly grabbed the medic's arm. His eyes focused for the first time since we found him. "They just wanted us to leave," he said, his voice hoarse. "That's all. They just wanted us to leave." Then his eyes went distant again, and he didn't say another word. We carried Marcus down the mountain on a stretcher. It took until nearly 10 p.m. to reach the vehicles. An ambulance was waiting to transport him to the hospital in Grand Junction. Martinez pulled Dale and me aside before the ambulance left. "What Marcus experienced, what you saw today, this is your first exposure to a reality that most people never encounter. These creatures exist. They're intelligent, they're territorial, and they're protected. Federal protection, the kind that comes with serious consequences for anyone who discusses them publicly or attempts to harm them. Your report will be filed through my office. You won't include this in your standard SAR documentation. You'll report that Marcus was found disoriented after getting lost, exposure and dehydration causing temporary confusion." That's the official story. "But why?" Sarah asked. "If they're real, if there's an undocumented species, shouldn't people know?" Martinez's expression was grim. "Because if people know, they'll come. Trophy hunters, cryptozoologists, tourists, media. These creatures have survived by remaining hidden. Their population is small, fragile. Public knowledge would be their death sentence. So we protect them by keeping them secret, and we keep people safe by monitoring their territories and quietly discouraging human presence in key areas." Dale looked at me, then at Sarah. "And if we refuse to keep quiet," Martinez didn't hesitate, "then you'll be charged with violating federal wildlife protection statutes. You'll lose your certifications. You could face prosecution. And more importantly, you'll be responsible for what happens to these creatures if the information gets out." We all knew there was no choice. We signed the documents. We kept the secret. Marcus Brennan recovered physically, but psychologically he was never quite the same. He dropped out of school, moved back to Oklahoma with his family. I heard through the grapevine that he refused to go anywhere near forests or mountains. His friends were similarly shaken, though their memories were incomplete. They remembered Marcus disappearing and being found, but the details had become fuzzy, dreamlike. As for what actually happened to Marcus during those missing hours, he never said. Not to doctors, not to investigators, not to anyone. Whatever he experienced in that forest, he kept locked inside. That was the first incident. Over the next 23 years, I encountered 8 more situations involving these creatures. Each one was documented, classified, and buried. Each one reinforced the same pattern. An undocumented species of highly intelligent great apes living in North America's most remote wilderness areas. Creatures that avoided humans when possible, but defended their territories when necessary. Beings that communicated through complex means we barely understood. And a massive, coordinated cover-up stretching across multiple federal agencies, all designed to keep the public ignorant of one of the most significant biological discoveries in human history. The second incident came in October of 1999 in the San Juan Mountains. A family of 4 had been reported missing after failing to return from a day hike near Silverton. We found them after an 8-hour search, huddled together in a small cave formation, cold and terrified, but physically unharmed. What scared them wasn't what attacked them, it was what protected them. The father, a software engineer from Denver named Peter Walsh, told us they'd gotten turned around in the failing light. As darkness fell, they realized they were lost. They'd been following what they thought was a trail when they heard something following them. Something large, something that breathed with a deep, resonant rhythm that echoed between the trees. Peter had a flashlight and he'd shine it toward the sounds, trying to see what was tracking them. He never got a clear look, just glimpses. Something tall, something covered in dark hair, something that moved through the forest with ease while they stumbled and struggled. Then they'd run, panicking, Peter carrying his youngest daughter, his wife Sarah pulling their son along. They'd crashed through underbrush, torn their clothing on branches, left their day pack behind in their flight. That's when they'd found the cave, really just a sheltered overhang beneath a rock outcropping. They'd huddled inside, Peter positioning himself at the entrance, ready to defend his family. And then they'd waited. Peter described what happened next in a voice that shook. The thing came to the entrance of the cave. He could see its outline against the slightly lighter darkness of the night. Massive shoulders, a head that seemed too large, too heavy. It just stood there, breathing, watching them. Peter had fumbled for his phone, desperate to call for help, but there was no signal, so they'd waited, locked in this stalemate with something that shouldn't exist. Peter's daughter Emily, who was 7 at the time, had started crying. Not hysterical crying, just quiet, scared whimpering, and the creature had responded. It made a sound. Peter struggled to describe it. Not a growl, not exactly vocalization, something between a hum and a low whistle, a sound that somehow felt comforting. And then something had moved in the darkness beyond the cave entrance. Multiple somethings. More of the creatures, Peter realized. They were all around the cave, and they weren't threatening the family, they were protecting them. Peter and Sarah had watched, stunned and terrified, as the creatures formed a perimeter around the cave. They'd heard sounds in the forest, snarls and yips, coyotes or wolves getting too close, and they'd heard the creatures respond, deep, aggressive vocalizations that sent whatever predators were out there fleeing. The family had stayed in that cave until dawn, watched over by beings they couldn't fully see. As the sun rose, Peter had finally gotten a clear look at one of them. It was standing perhaps 20 yards from the cave entrance, positioned between the family and the forest. 8 feet tall at least, covered in reddish-brown hair that caught the early morning light. Broad shoulders, long arms, a face that was simultaneously human and utterly alien. The creature had looked back at the cave, looked directly at Peter, and Peter said something happened in that moment. The creature's eyes held intelligence, recognition, something that looked almost like compassion. Then it had raised one massive arm and pointed down the mountain toward the valley, toward the distant town. The message was clear. That's the way home. Go. The other creatures had melted away into the forest, and the family had walked out, following the direction the creature had indicated. They'd walked for about an hour and found themselves on a marked trail that led directly back to the trailhead. When we found them later that morning, they were hypothermic and exhausted but alive. Martinez was called again. More documents were signed. The official report stated the family got lost, found shelter, and made their way out at dawn. No mention of creatures, no mention of protection. But I remembered what Peter Walsh said to me as we were helping his family down to the vehicles. He'd pulled me aside, his face serious. I don't know what those things were, but they saved us. My kids would have died of exposure if we'd spent the night in the open. And whatever was out there, the wolves or coyotes, they would have come for us without those protectors. Whatever they are, they chose to help us. They chose compassion. I don't know how to process that. How do you process something like that? The third incident happened in June of 2002, and it was the one that nearly broke me. A woman named Jennifer Hartley had gone missing during a solo backpacking trip in the Weminuche wilderness. She was an experienced outdoors woman, a wilderness guide by profession, someone who knew the mountains as well as anyone. She'd filed a trip plan with the ranger station, detailing her route and expected return. When she didn't check in, we launched a search. We found her camp on the second day. It was undisturbed, perfectly neat, her tent still standing, her food properly stored in a bare canister. But Jennifer was gone. Her boots were in the tent. Her jacket was hanging on a line between two trees. It looked like she'd just stepped away for a moment, but she'd been gone for 3 days. Sarah, who was lead tracking again, found the prints almost immediately. The same massive humanoid footprints we'd seen before. They approached Jennifer's camp from the west, circled it several times, then headed north, and alongside them, smaller prints, barefoot human prints. Jennifer's prints. She'd walked away barefoot, following the creature. No signs of struggle. No indication she'd been dragged or forced. She'd just walked away into the wilderness. We followed the trail for 2 days, working in shifts, bringing in additional teams. The trail led us deep into some of the most remote terrain in Colorado, places where few humans ever ventured, places where the mountains still held their secrets. On the third day, we found Jennifer. She was sitting beside a stream, her feet in the cold water. She was thin, obviously hadn't eaten much. Her skin was sunburned, her hair tangled, but she was alive, and she was smiling. When she saw us, that smile faded. She looked almost disappointed. "Oh," she said quietly, "you found me." The medics checked her immediately. Dehydration, malnutrition, exposure, but nothing life-threatening. As they worked, Jennifer kept looking back at the forest, at the trees, as if searching for something, as if waiting for something. Martinez arrived by helicopter this time. He talked to Jennifer privately for over an hour. When he emerged from the tent, his face was troubled. "She's not making much sense," he told us. "She keeps talking about being shown things, about learning, about understanding. She says she's writing a book." I think the exposure affected her mentally more than physically, but Jennifer wasn't confused. Over the next few months, as she recovered, pieces of her story emerged. She hadn't been taken. She'd been invited. She described waking in her tent that first night to find a creature standing outside, not threatening, not aggressive, just present. And somehow, in ways she struggled to articulate, it had communicated with her, showed her through gesture and sound that it wanted her to follow, and she had. For 3 days, she traveled with a small group of them, A family, she called them. An elder male, a younger female, and a juvenile. They'd shown her things, plants with medicinal properties that she'd never learned about in any wilderness training. Water sources hidden in rock formations, signs of animal movement written in bent grass and disturbed soil, ways of moving through the forest that left almost no trace. They'd fed her, sharing food that they foraged, roots and berries and nuts. Not enough to sustain her long term, but enough to keep her alive. They'd protected her, guiding her around dangerous terrain, warning her of unstable ground. And they'd communicated, not with words. She was very clear about that, but with sounds, with gestures, with a kind of emotional transmission she couldn't quite explain. She said she understood them and they understood her. She said she'd been given a gift, knowledge that most humans would never access. And then, on the morning of the third day, they'd left her by the stream. The elder male had touched her shoulder, a gesture that felt like farewell. Then they'd disappeared into the forest. She'd been waiting there, she admitted, hoping they'd come back. When we asked her why she hadn't tried to return to her camp, to safety, she looked at us like we were the confused ones. "I was safe," she said. "I was safer there than I've ever been in my life." Martinez classified Jennifer's case as a medical rescue with temporary psychological effects. From exposure, her story was dismissed as hallucinations brought on by dehydration and lack of food. But I talked to Jennifer 6 months later, just a casual phone call to check on a rescue subject, something I did sometimes. She was doing well, she said, back to guiding, but she'd changed her approach. She took smaller groups now, taught them to really see the forest, to understand they were guests in a world that existed long before humans arrived. I asked her if she still thought about what happened. "Every day," she said, "and you know what? They're still watching me. I feel it sometimes when I'm out there. They're checking on me, making sure I'm okay, making sure I remember what they taught me. It's like I'm part of something now, something bigger than myself." I didn't report that conversation to Martinez. The fourth incident was in August of 2005, and it involved a tragedy that still haunts me. A 12-year-old boy named Tommy Reeves had wandered away from a family camping trip in the Mount Zirkle wilderness. We searched for 4 days. His parents were desperate, sleep-deprived, clinging to hope, even as the probability of survival decreased with each passing hour. We found him on day 5. He'd fallen from a cliff, a 20-foot drop onto rocks below. The fall had killed him, probably instantly. Broken neck, massive head trauma. He'd been dead for at least 3 days based on decomposition in the August heat, but something had cared for his body. When we reached the site, we found Tommy's small form covered in pine branches, carefully arranged to shade him from the sun and protect him from scavengers. Large stones had been placed around the body in a circle, and beside the body, arranged in a neat pile, were mountain wildflowers. Dozens of them, bright colors against the gray stone. Someone or something had created a funeral cairn. Sarah and I stood there, looking at this impossible scene, and I saw tears running down her face. She wasn't alone. Even Dale, who'd been doing this work for 30 years, had to walk away for a minute. The footprints around the site told the story, the massive prints we'd come to recognize, multiple individuals. They'd found Tommy's body, understood what had happened, and performed what could only be called a burial ritual. They'd mourned a human child they'd never known. Martinez's team documented everything, but the official report stated only that we'd recovered the body, the flowers, the stones, the careful arrangement. None of it made it into the records. Tommy's parents were told he'd fallen and died quickly, which was true. They were told we'd found him in a protected location, which was also true. They weren't told about the funeral cairn or what it meant. But Tommy's father, Michael Reeves, asked me a question as we were preparing to transport his son's body. down the mountain. The way he was, he paused, searching for words. The way he was arranged. Did you do that? Did your team make it look peaceful? I should have lied. I should have followed protocol. But looking at this man who just lost his child, I couldn't. No, sir, I said quietly. We found him that way. Someone else cared for your son. Someone made sure he wasn't alone. Michael Reeves looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, and I saw something shift in his expression. A tiny measure of comfort in an ocean of grief. Thank you, he said. Thank you for telling me the truth. Martinez was furious when he found out I'd said something. He threatened me with everything, loss of certification, federal charges, the whole arsenal. But in the end, nothing happened. Maybe because he understood that some truths, even classified ones, need to be told when they might bring comfort to a grieving parent. Or maybe because he knew that what I'd said was vague enough to have plausible deniability. Either way, the incident was closed. The fifth incident came in April of 2009, during an early spring snowstorm that caught a group of backcountry skiers by surprise. 4 experienced skiers had gone into the backcountry near Vail Pass. They'd checked the avalanche forecast, which was moderate risk, and they'd carried all the proper safety equipment: beacons, probes, shovels, the works. But spring storms in the Rockies are unpredictable, and what had been forecast as 3 to 5 inches turned into 18 inches in under 4 hours. Heavy, wet snow that loaded onto steep slopes and created textbook avalanche conditions. The skiers had triggered a slide, a big one. We got the emergency beacon signal at 2:17 p.m. and scrambled immediately. But the weather was deteriorating fast. Visibility dropping to near zero, wind howling down the passes. We couldn't get helicopters in the air. We had to go in on snowmobiles and skis, fighting our way through conditions that were borderline suicidal themselves. We reached the slide area just before dark. The avalanche had run for over 1,000 feet, a massive debris field of chunked up snow and shattered trees. Finding anyone in that chaos would take hours, maybe days. We began the systematic beacon search, our transceivers picking up the signals from the buried skiers' beacons. We located the first beacon signal and started probing, but before we could begin digging, we saw something that made us stop. There were tracks in the fresh snow, the massive, unmistakable footprints we'd learned to recognize. And the tracks led directly to one of the beacon signals. Dale made a decision. Follow those tracks, see where they lead. We followed them about 50 yards across the debris field to a spot where someone or something had been digging. There was a hole in the snow, maybe 4 feet deep, and at the bottom of that hole was one of the skiers, a woman named Andrea Moss. She was unconscious, her face pale, but she was breathing. Her beacon was still transmitting, and she'd been partially excavated from the snow. Not completely, she was still buried from the waist down, but her upper body had been cleared, her airway was open, and she'd been positioned so her head was elevated, preventing snow from compacting around her face. Someone had started the rescue. Someone had known where to dig and had begun the work of saving her life. We completed the excavation, got Andrea out, and started emergency medical treatment. She was hypothermic and had a broken leg, but she was alive. The other 3 skiers weren't as fortunate. We found them over the next 2 hours. All 3 had been killed by the initial impact of the avalanche. Massive trauma that no amount of quick rescue could have prevented. Andrea was the only survivor, and she survived because someone had started digging her out within minutes of the slide. Later, after Andrea had been airlifted to the hospital and stabilized, Martinez interviewed her. She remembered the avalanche, remembered being swept away, tumbled like a rag doll, buried under crushing weight. She remembered the terror, the inability to breathe, the certainty that she was going to die. And then she remembered something else: pressure on the snow above her, vibrations, the snow compressing, being moved. She'd thought it was a rescue team at first, but the timeline didn't work. We hadn't even been dispatched yet when someone started digging. She remembered air reaching her face, remembered being able to breathe again, and she remembered a smell, musky, earthy, wild. She remembered the sound of heavy breathing, deep and rhythmic. She remembered drifting in and out of consciousness, hypothermia pulling her under, and she remembered, or thought she remembered, a massive hand touching her face, gently checking if she was alive. When I visited Andrea 2 weeks later, she was recovering well. The broken leg would heal. The psychological trauma of the avalanche would take longer, but she was working with a therapist. I asked her about what she remembered. The official report said you were partially self-rescued, I said carefully, that you'd managed to create an air pocket and clear some snow from around your upper body. Andrea looked at me with eyes that were older than they'd been before the avalanche. That's not what happened, and you know it. Something dug me out. Something saved my life while my friends died buried in that snow. I just nodded. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes it's enough that both people understand it. Whatever it was, Andrea said quietly, I owe it my life. Every day I'm alive. Every day I get to see my daughter grow up. That's because something chose to help me. Something that didn't have to. Something that could have just walked away. The sixth incident was different. It happened in July of 2012 in the Maroon Bells Wilderness, and it involved not a rescue, but a warning. A commercial guiding company had been taking increasingly large groups into the wilderness area, pushing deeper into remote terrain than the established routes typically allowed. They were catering to wealthy clients who wanted the bragging rights of experiencing truly untouched wilderness, and they were skirting regulations to provide that experience. We started finding signs, dead trees pushed over, blocking trails, rock cairns that clearly marked boundaries arranged in patterns that seemed to say, turn back. Equipment going missing from base camps. Nothing violent, nothing threatening to human safety, but a clear pattern of interference. The guide company ignored the signs. They'd invested in expensive permits and had bookings to fulfill. They kept pushing their groups deeper, establishing semi-permanent camps in areas that should have remained pristine. That's when things escalated. A guide returned from a supply run to find every tent in the camp collapsed. Not torn, not damaged, just the stakes pulled up and the tents carefully folded flat. All the food had been removed from bear canisters, which shouldn't have been possible since those canisters are designed to be bear-proof, and arranged in a pile in the center of camp. On top of the pile was a single item, a client's satellite phone crushed flat as if in a hydraulic press. The message was crystal clear. Leave. Now. And if you try to call for help, we'll prevent that too. The guide company finally listened. They evacuated their camps, returned their clients to the trailhead, and reported equipment failure as the reason for ending the trips early. Martinez and his team investigated. They found territorial markers throughout the area, evidence of a family group of at least 4 individuals who had claimed that particular valley as their territory. The Forest Service quietly amended regulations for the area, creating buffer zones and seasonal closures. The guide company was strongly encouraged to focus their operations elsewhere. No one was hurt. No one was even directly threatened. But the message had been delivered with unmistakable clarity. This is our home. We've allowed you to visit the edges, but you've pushed too far. Respect boundaries or face consequences. What struck me about this incident was the restraint. These creatures could have destroyed the camp violently, could have injured people, could have terrorized clients and guides alike. Instead, they delivered a measured response. Firm, unmistakable, but carefully calibrated to achieve their goal without causing harm. It was sophisticated communication, It was, in a very real sense, diplomacy, Martinez agreed. After documenting the site, he pulled me aside. "You see the pattern now, don't you? They don't want conflict, they want coexistence, but coexistence requires respect for boundaries, and they're willing to enforce those boundaries when necessary. The question I keep asking myself is whether we're capable of that kind of respect. Whether humanity can share space with another intelligent species without trying to dominate or destroy them." The seventh incident was the hardest for me personally, because it involved someone I knew. Her name was Rachel Kim, and she was a wildlife photographer who'd worked with our SAR team several times, documenting rescues for public education materials. She was talented, fearless, and absolutely passionate about wilderness conservation. In September of 2015, Rachel went into the San Juan Mountains alone, chasing rumors of unusual wildlife behavior that locals had reported. She'd heard stories from hunters and hikers about large animals moving through the high country, animals that didn't match any known species. She'd become obsessed with getting proof. We all knew what she was really looking for. She'd been present for one of our operations where Martinez had shown up, and she'd asked too many questions, pushed too hard for details. She'd been warned, threatened with the same legal consequences all of us had been threatened with. But Rachel had always been stubborn. When she didn't return from her solo trip after 3 days, we knew something was wrong. We found her camp on the second day of searching. It had been systematically destroyed, not violently, but thoroughly. Her camera equipment was smashed beyond repair. Film and memory cards were missing. Her laptop was crushed. Every single piece of technology that could record or transmit images had been rendered useless. Rachel herself was found 4 miles from camp, sitting at the base of a cliff, her arms wrapped around her knees. She was physically unharmed. No injuries, no signs of struggle, but she was catatonic, staring into space, unresponsive to our calls or touch. We got her to the hospital where doctors found nothing physically wrong. No drugs in her system, no signs of trauma, no neurological damage they could detect. But Rachel didn't speak for 3 days. When she finally did, she spoke to me. She'd asked specifically for me, and Martinez arranged for us to meet in her hospital room. What she told me changed my understanding of everything. Rachel had found them, not by accident, but because she'd deliberately pushed into territory she knew was marked as theirs. She'd set up cameras, motion sensors, audio recorders. She'd been determined to get proof that would blow the cover-up wide open, and they'd known. They'd known exactly what she was doing and why. On the 3rd night of her vigil, they'd come, not aggressively, but deliberately. A group of 5, ranging from a juvenile to what she described as an ancient elder, a creature that moved slowly but radiated authority. The elder had approached her directly while the others remained at a distance. And what happened next, Rachel struggled to describe. She said the creature had looked at her, and in that gaze, something passed between them. Not words, not thoughts exactly, but understanding, communication that bypassed language entirely. She understood in that moment the weight of what she'd been trying to do. She understood that revealing these creatures would doom them, that humanity in its current state of development wasn't ready to coexist with another intelligent species, that we would study them, cage them, hunt them, or destroy their habitat in the name of progress and profit. She understood their history, millennia of surviving by hiding, by staying one step ahead of humanity's expansion, watching as we destroyed forests, polluted rivers, drove countless other species to extinction, adapting, retreating, enduring, and she understood their fear, the deep existential terror of being discovered by a species that had never learned to share resources, to respect boundaries, to value life other than its own. The elder had shown her something else too. images somehow transmitted directly into her mind. Not hallucinations, she insisted, but shared memories. She'd seen other humans who'd tried to document them. She'd seen the consequences. Some were found confused and disoriented, their equipment destroyed like her. But others who'd been more aggressive, more determined, who'd refused to accept the warning, they'd simply vanished. Not killed, Rachel said firmly. She'd understood that clearly. These creatures didn't want to harm humans, but they would do whatever was necessary to protect their survival. And sometimes that meant making people disappear so completely that no trace would ever be found. When the elder finished, Rachel said, it had touched her forehead with one massive finger, gently, almost tenderly, and she'd felt something like forgiveness, like sadness, like hope that maybe, someday, humans would evolve enough to deserve to share the world with them. Then they'd destroyed her equipment and led her to where we would find her, leaving her unharmed but forever changed. Rachel never tried to photograph them again. She actually became one of the most vocal advocates for wilderness preservation, though she never said exactly why. She pushed for larger protected zones, stricter regulations on human access to sensitive areas, better education about respecting wildlife and wild spaces. She knew the truth, but kept the secret. Because she told me, some things are more important than fame or recognition. Some things are worth protecting, even if it means lying to everyone you know. Even if it means carrying the weight of that knowledge alone. The 8th incident happened in June of 2018 and involved a case of mistaken identity that nearly turned tragic. A group of extreme adventure tourists had hired an unlicensed guide to take them into restricted wilderness areas at night. They'd wanted the thrill of experiencing the forest in darkness, the danger of being out where most people feared to go. The guide, a local man I'll call Jake because his real name is still on active watch lists, had taken them into territory that was clearly marked as off-limits. He knew about the creatures, he'd heard the stories. He thought those stories made his nighttime tours more exciting, more authentic. He was selling danger and mystery to people who'd grown bored with ordinary adventure. What Jake hadn't counted on was that the creatures took territorial boundaries very seriously. The group was 4 hours into their night hike when they encountered something on the trail ahead. Dark shapes, large, moving with purpose. Jake's clients panicked. One of them, a man from Texas, who'd brought his hunting rifle despite being told not to, raised his weapon and fired 3 shots, wild, panicked shots, into the darkness. We got the emergency call at 11:43 p.m. Shots fired, screaming GPS coordinates. We mobilized immediately, but we knew we wouldn't reach them for at least 2 hours given the terrain and darkness. Martinez's satellite phone rang before we'd even loaded into the trucks. He listened for a moment, his face going pale. Then he made a call on a secure line, speaking in codes I didn't understand. "Bring full medical and containment team," he said. "This could be bad." When we reached the location just after 2 a.m., we found the group huddled in a tight circle, flashlights pointed outward, the man with the rifle still gripping it with white knuckles. They were surrounded. 7 of the creatures stood in a loose perimeter around the humans, just standing, waiting. The tableau was surreal. 2 groups of beings, both intelligent, both terrified, locked in a standoff that could turn deadly in seconds. Martinez moved forward slowly, his hands raised, palms forward, the ancient peace gesture that apparently worked across species. He called out, his voice calm and steady. "These people mean no harm. They're foolish, but not malicious. They're leaving now, and they'll never return. I give you my word." The creatures didn't respond. They just stood there, dark silhouettes against the slightly lighter darkness of the forest. Martinez turned to Jake and the tourists. "Put the weapon on the ground," he said quietly to the man from Texas. "Slowly. Then all of you on your knees, hands visible. Show them you're not a threat. Do it now. For a moment, I thought Texas was going to refuse. His finger was on the trigger, his eyes wild. But Jake grabbed his arm. Do what he says, man. Please. I've seen what these things can do. Texas lowered the rifle, set it on the ground. The whole group knelt, hands raised. Martinez spoke again, addressing the creatures. No one was hurt. The shots missed. This was fear, not aggression. Let them go, and I swear they'll be punished by their own kind. They'll never come here again. The standoff lasted maybe 30 seconds. It felt like hours. Then one of the creatures, the largest, made a sound. Low, resonant, not quite a growl. The others responded, a chorus of similar sounds. Communication. Debate, maybe. Finally, the large one stepped forward. Martinez tensed but held his ground. The creature approached to within 10 feet of our group, close enough that I could see its eyes reflecting our flashlights, close enough to see the intelligence in that gaze and the anger. It looked at the rifle on the ground, then at the man from Texas, then at Martinez, and it pointed, one massive arm extended, finger aimed back the way we'd come. The message was unmistakable. Take them and leave. Martinez nodded slowly. We're going. Thank you for your restraint. The creature held his gaze for a moment longer. Then it turned and melted into the forest, the others following. Within seconds, they'd disappeared completely, as if they'd never been there. We got the group out. The man from Texas was arrested for discharging a firearm in a national forest. Among other charges, Jake lost his guiding license permanently and faced significant fines. The tourists were required to sign NDAs so restrictive that they'd face bankruptcy if they ever spoke publicly about what they'd experienced. Martinez was quiet on the hike out. When we finally reached the vehicles at dawn, he pulled me aside. That was the closest we've ever come to a conflict that would have required lethal force. If those things had attacked, if they'd killed those idiots, we would have had to respond. And that would have meant, he trailed off, shaking his head. War, I finished quietly. It would have meant war between humans and them. Martinez nodded. There are contingency plans, military plans, for what would happen if these creatures ever posed a systematic threat to human life. Those plans involve extermination, complete and total, because if the public knew about hostile encounters with an unknown species, the panic would be unstoppable. So we prevent hostile encounters. We maintain the secret. We protect both sides by keeping them separate. That's when I really understood the stakes. This wasn't just about protecting a rare species. This wasn't just about scientific discovery. This was about preventing a genocide. Because if humanity ever decided these creatures were a threat, we would hunt them to extinction. We'd use helicopters and thermal imaging and military tactics. We'd wipe them out within months. And then we'd have to live with what we'd done, with the knowledge that we'd exterminated another intelligent species because we couldn't coexist peacefully. The ninth and final incident I'm going to tell you about happened just 8 months ago in October of 2024. It's the freshest in my memory and the one that convinced me to finally break my silence. A young couple, newlyweds, had gone on what they called a honeymoon camping trip in the Flat Tops Wilderness, same area where Marcus Brennan disappeared back in 1997. They'd been camping for 3 days when the woman, Melissa Crawford, went into labor. She was 7 months pregnant and the labor was premature, brought on possibly by the altitude and physical exertion. Her husband, David, activated their emergency beacon at 4:16 a.m. The helicopter couldn't fly in the pre-dawn darkness and the rough weather that had moved in overnight. We had to go in on foot, carrying medical equipment, racing against time to reach a woman giving birth in the wilderness 2 months early, with all the complications that could entail. We reached their camp at 6:47 a.m., but when we arrived, we found something extraordinary. Melissa was in her tent. The baby had been born. A girl, tiny and premature but breathing, crying with the strong lungs that meant life. And Melissa wasn't alone. Kneeling beside her, helping to keep the baby warm, was one of them. A female, judging by size and build. She was cradling the infant against her own body, sharing warmth, keeping the premature baby's temperature stable. She looked up when we arrived, and our eyes met. In that moment, I saw something I'll never forget. Concern, care, the universal expression of someone trying to help. David was conscious, sitting on the other side of Melissa, tears streaming down his face. He was holding his wife's hand, and he looked at us with an expression of awe and gratitude. "She helped us," he said, his voice cracking. "The baby came so fast, and she was so small, and we didn't know what to do. And then she was just there. She helped deliver the baby. She cleaned her, kept her warm. She saved our daughter's life." Our medical team moved in, taking over the care of mother and infant. The creature carefully, gently transferred the baby to our medic's arms. She watched for a moment, making sure we knew what we were doing, making sure the baby was in good hands. Then she looked at Melissa, made a soft sound that somehow conveyed reassurance, and backed out of the tent. I followed her outside. I don't know why. Maybe because after 23 years of encountering these beings, I felt like I owed them something, like I owed this one something. She stood at the edge of camp, looking back at the tent where the baby's cries were growing stronger. I approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I know you can understand me. Thank you for helping them." She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that transcended species, that crossed the vast evolutionary distance between us. I saw compassion. I saw wisdom. I saw a being that understood suffering and chose to alleviate it, even for a species that had driven her kind to the edge of extinction. She made a sound, soft, melodic almost. Then she reached out and touched my shoulder, just for a second, a connection, an acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked into the forest, disappearing among the trees. We got Melissa and the baby to the hospital. Both survived. Both are healthy. The baby, named Hope, is thriving. Melissa and David's story was reported as an emergency wilderness birth with successful SAR response. No mention of the creature who'd kept their daughter alive until we arrived. Martinez retired 3 months after that incident. He was 68 years old and had spent 30 years managing the secret, balancing the impossible task of protecting both species. At his retirement party, he pulled me aside. "I'm done," he said. "I'm too old, too tired. But the work continues. Someone has to maintain the boundaries, prevent the conflicts, keep the secret." He looked at me intently. "I've recommended you as my replacement. You've seen enough, experienced enough to understand what's really at stake. The question is whether you're willing to take on the weight of it." I told him I'd think about it, and I have been thinking about it for months now, thinking about everything I've witnessed, about the intelligence and compassion I've seen from beings we're told don't exist, about the elaborate machinery of secrecy that keeps two intelligent species separated, about whether that separation is really in anyone's best interest. That's why I'm telling you these stories now, because I've decided I can't take Martinez's position. I can't spend the next decade maintaining a lie, no matter how well-intentioned that lie might be. I believe it's time for the truth. Not because I want fame or attention, not because I'm bitter about the restrictions I've lived under, but because I've come to believe that humanity deserves to know about these beings, and more importantly, these beings deserve to be known. They deserve to be recognized as what they are. Another branch of intelligent life on Earth. Creatures with culture, language, emotions, and moral frameworks. Beings capable of compassion, restraint, and coexistence. Beings who've been sharing these mountains with us for for thousands of years, watching from the shadows, avoiding conflict, living in a fragile balance that we never knew existed. I know what releasing this information might trigger. I know about the trophy hunters who will flood into the wilderness, the cryptozoologists who'll turn remote forests into tourist attractions, the lumber companies who'll fight even harder against wilderness protection if it means protecting another species, the government agencies who'll scramble to contain the information and discredit me. I know all of it, but I also know what staying silent means. It means these beings continue to lose habitat year by year. It means their population continues to dwindle toward extinction. It means we lose the opportunity to learn from a species that figured out how to live sustainably in these mountains for millennia. It means we lose the chance to prove we're capable of sharing the planet with another intelligent species. The 9 incidents I've described span 23 years, 9 moments when the veil between species grew thin, 9 times when humans and these creatures interacted in ways that revealed their true nature. They protected a lost family from predators. They mourned a human child they'd never known. They rescued an avalanche victim. They delivered warnings instead of violence. They helped deliver a baby in the wilderness. In every case, when they had the opportunity to harm humans, they chose restraint. They chose compassion. They chose the difficult path of coexistence over the easy path of violence. Can we say the same about humanity? Can we honestly claim that if the situation were reversed, if we discovered a weaker, rarer, intelligent species in our territory, that we would show the same restraint? The evidence of history suggests otherwise. So here's what I'm asking. I'm asking that you hear these stories and understand what they reveal. That there's more intelligence in these forests than we've acknowledged. That we're not alone on this planet, and we never have been. That the question isn't whether Bigfoot is real, because I can tell you with absolute certainty that they are. The question is whether we're evolved enough as a species to coexist with them peacefully, whether we can set aside our fear and our need to dominate everything we encounter, whether we can be worthy of sharing this world with beings who've already proven they're willing to share it with us. I'm 66 years old. I'm retiring in 6 weeks. I've kept these secrets for 23 years, bound by federal regulations and threats of prosecution. But some truths are too important to die in silence. Some stories need to be told, consequences be damned. The creatures I've encountered over these decades have names in the restricted files. The elder that Marcus Brennan encountered was designated Alpha 1. The family that protected the Walshes was Bravo Group. The female that helped deliver Baby Hope was Echo 7. But they're not designations. They're not specimens or subjects or assets. They're people, different from us, adapted to a different way of life, but people nonetheless. They love their families. They mourn their dead. They protect their territories and care for their young. They help those in need, even when those in need belong to the species that's pushed them to the brink of extinction. If that's not personhood, then the word has no meaning. The machinery of secrecy that's kept them hidden is vast. It involves multiple federal agencies, scientific institutions, law enforcement organizations, even international cooperation with Canadian and Mexican authorities. It's a conspiracy in the truest sense of the word. But it's not a conspiracy of malice. It's a conspiracy of protection. People trying to prevent extinction, trying to avoid panic, trying to maintain a fragile peace between species. I understand their motivations. I've been part of that machinery, but I've come to believe it's unsustainable. You can't hide an entire species forever, not in the age of satellite imagery and DNA analysis and ubiquitous cameras, not when their habitat is shrinking every year, not when climate change is forcing them into new territories closer to human populations. The secret will come out eventually. The question is, Whether it comes out on our terms, with preparation and planning, or whether it comes out chaotically in a way that leads to conflict and tragedy. So I'm choosing to be the one who breaks the silence. Let them prosecute me. Let them discredit me. Let them trot out experts who will explain I'm suffering from altitude sickness or early dementia or attention-seeking delusion. I don't care anymore, because I've looked into the eyes of these beings too many times to stay silent. I've seen their intelligence, their compassion, their desperate struggle to survive in a world that's forgot them. And I can't pretend anymore that keeping the secret is the right choice. To the creatures themselves, if somehow you understand human words, if somehow this message reaches you in your hidden valleys and remote forests, I want you to know something. You've shown us who you are. You've demonstrated restraint and compassion that humanity rarely manages toward its own kind, let alone toward another species. You've earned the right to exist peacefully, to raise your families, to live according to your own culture and values. I'm sorry that my species has pushed you to the edge. I'm sorry that you've had to live in fear for so long, and I'm sorry if revealing your existence brings more hardship to you. That's not my intention. My intention is to give you the protection that comes from acknowledgement, to make it impossible for anyone to wipe you out because the world will be watching, to force humanity to confront the question of whether we can share space with another intelligent species. You deserve better than extinction in silence. To my former colleagues in search and rescue, to Martinez and Sarah and Dale and all the others who've kept this secret, I know you'll see this as betrayal. I know I'm violating every agreement I signed, every oath I took, but I can't die knowing I helped maintain a lie that might ultimately lead to the extinction of an entire species. Sometimes the right choice is the difficult one. To the federal agencies that will inevitably come after me, I've already distributed copies of all the evidence I've gathered over 23 years. Photographs, recordings, documentation of all 9 incidents plus dozens more. If anything happens to me, if I mysteriously disappear or suffer an unfortunate accident, everything goes public immediately. I've made sure of that. You can silence me, but you can't silence the truth anymore. It's out there now, protected by multiple redundancies, ready to emerge if you try to suppress it. To the general public, I ask only this. If you go into the wilderness looking for these creatures, go with respect. Don't bring weapons, don't bring crowds, don't try to capture or harm them. They've lived peacefully in these mountains for thousands of years. They deserve to continue doing so. Think of them not as monsters or curiosities, but as neighbors, distant neighbors who prefer their privacy, who've given us plenty of space, who've shown remarkable restraint in the face of our expansion into their territories. Treat them the way you'd want to be treated if the situation were reversed. The 9 incidents I've shared are just a fraction of what's been documented over the decades. There are hundreds of cases, thousands maybe, a whole hidden history of interactions between humans and these beings. Interactions that reveal a species struggling to survive, trying to maintain their way of life while the world changes around them. They're not aggressive, they're not dangerous, except when cornered or when their families are threatened. They're survivors, adapting to impossible circumstances, showing us through their actions what true resilience looks like. In 6 weeks, I'll retire from Colorado Search and Rescue. I'll hand in my equipment, finish my paperwork, and walk away from a career that's defined my adult life. But I won't walk away from this truth. I'll spend whatever time I have left advocating for these beings, pushing for protected habitats, for serious scientific study conducted ethically, for legal recognition of their personhood. And I'll tell these stories to anyone who will listen. Stories of compassion across species lines. Stories of intelligence we've refused to acknowledge. Stories of a fragile balance maintained in secret, while the world remained oblivious. Stories of beings who deserve better than what we've given them. My name is Robert Chen. I'm 66 years old. I've spent 23 years with Colorado Search and Rescue, and I've encountered an intelligent species that most people believe doesn't exist. I've been ordered to stay quiet, threatened with prosecution, bound by regulations designed to maintain secrecy. But I'm breaking that silence now because some truths are more important than self-preservation. Because these beings deserve to be known. Because humanity needs to confront what we've been avoiding. We're not alone on this planet. We never have been. And it's time we started acting like we understand what that means. The 9 incidents I've shared happened. They're real. The creatures are real. The question now is what we do with that knowledge. Do we respond with fear and violence, proving these beings were right to hide from us? Or do we respond with curiosity and respect, proving we're capable of evolving beyond our worst instincts? I don't know the answer, but I know that keeping the secret hasn't protected anyone. It's just delayed the inevitable. And I'd rather face that inevitable with truth than maintain a comfortable lie. These are the things I found during my 23 years with Search and Rescue. These are the things they told me never to discuss. And these are the things I'm telling you now because the time for secrets has passed. What happens next is up to all of us.